Hey, folks, welcome back to Ken Michaels Radio, where we talk about the Beatles on all of our shows and bring on special guests. And indeed, we're doing just that on our show at this time. Glenn Greenberg is back. He was on our show not that long ago when he wrote this bookazine, which came out for Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney at 80 from Time Magazine. We talked about the bookazine at the time, and he was a great guest back then. He's got a new bookazine out. What a life to lead, bookazine. Anyway, it's called The Trivia Book of the Beatles. It's now out in bookstores and supermarkets. And is it available on Amazon yet?
It's not available on Amazon, but it is available through the online shop of the publisher, A360. So you can order it directly from them at magazineshop.us.
Okay.
And it's there.
All right. Very good. So this bookazine, which just came out, is really good, especially for new Beatle fans and casual Beatle fans. I wanted to know, first of all, what gave you the idea of doing a trivia bookazine? I feel so awkward. Keep saying keep saying bookazine. I'm not used to saying that word, but
How about Magabook?
Magabook. Okay,
You can do a
fine.
Magabook. um, that's a good question. The publisher that I do these for, A360, and they're packaged by a company called 1010 Media, who I work directly with. They do this kind of stuff for a variety of topics that are like perennially popular topics. They did
Hmm,
one for Star Trek very recently,
okay.
which I was actually offered to do, but I was offered to do Star Trek or the Beatles, and I decided to do the Beatles. But the Star Trek book just came out as well, and it's a similar format. So it's a format that they do for these topics that are constant sellers, that are reliable sellers. And the Beatles, as I'm sure you know, has long been a reliable seller. So it only made sense to take that format and apply it to the band. So I was approached with the idea to do it, and jumped at the chance, and came up with my editor Bob Durr, came up with the structure. We figured out that the best way to do this would be 9 chapters, 9 questions per chapter, with a lot of illustrations and photos and stuff like that, and that would work best. So once we figured that part out, it was like, okay, let's break it down then by eras. So you've got the early years, Beatlemania, the studio years,
Right.
the final years. So that's four chapters right there. Then you do 4 chapters, one on each Beatle, where you can get in more into their personal lives, their backgrounds, not so much about the band, but about them within the band and outside of the band. And then the last chapter would be devoted strictly to the solo years.
Hmm.
And so before you know it, that's 9 chapters right there. And so we were all set. So I worked that out with my editor. And then the next thing we were going to do is, okay, well, what are the questions going to be? The original idea, and we kind of drifted a little bit away from that, was kind of do it like Jeopardy, where the questions get progressively harder. And I think that's kind of the way I wrote it, where each question, by the time you start really butt simple with number one, and then by the time you get to 9, you're thinking more about, okay, well, let's aim this one at the diehards.
Huh.
But I think the way the magazine ended up being designed, and I think the way that the layout kind of dictated the final running order of the questions. And so I think that it came to be more chronological, and kind of more tells a story a little bit more, I think. And I think that's kind of how it all ended up. Because I do know that in some instances the questions are not in the same order that I wrote them in, but in
Hmm.
many cases they are. So make of that what you will.
I wasn't aware that it went from easy to difficult. But I do Beatles trivia all the time. Ever since I started doing my radio program in
Right.
March of 1982. Every week on the air, I've had Beatles trivia, and I have it on my website every single week. And I do feel like the most effective way that you can have trivia is to try to reach every level of fan. You got to
Mhm.
put something in there that might be really easy, but stick a few things in there that the more hardcore fan is going to enjoy. And what I like most about this particular bookazine is that even for some of the hardcore fans, there might be some questions that you might have to think about that you may not know instantly, that we kind
Yeah,
of take for granted. You might think everybody knows this.
right, right.
So,
Yeah,
like
I
what?
mean, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And every day, the way I try, the mindset that I tried to go into this with was every day a new Beatles fan is created, and they don't know this stuff. And so I again, I tried to focus on nice to know versus need to know. The other thing I liked about this format is that it's not a quiz. It's obviously not a quiz. It's not a question with multiple choice. The way it's structured is we ask a question, and then there's like a short essay answer, about 75 to 100, in maybe some cases 125 words, little essay that gives context, that gives facts and figures, that paints a more complete picture than you would get if it was just a multiple choice Q&A, and it's yes, no. Even in the questions where I do true and false, it's
Mm,
like true or false, and here's some really cool information behind, that adds to the answer. And so I really like the format, and I like the fact that we can get into some depth, and it wasn't just a one-word answer. We can bring some history and facts and figures and context. And that's the most important thing for me, is context. And so I think it was a really great format, and I think people will not only get the trivia parts, but they're going to
mm,
get a sense of history as well.
true. Yeah, and even you'd be surprised because in all the years that I've been doing the work that I do, and especially if you ever watch the Game Show Network and there are questions about the Beatles and the
Hmm.
contestants don't know the simplest stuff that's
Yeah.
out there, like who
Yep.
was the drummer in the Beatles before Ringo. A lot of people
Right.
in the world, believe it or not, don't know that.
Right.
So it's good to have that kind of information in something like this. And then at the same time, it's great to know what song did Paul McCartney write for the Everly Brothers? Something that a more knowledgeable hardcore fan would be into at the same
Look,
time.
I mean, here's the thing. I mean, I've been a Beatles fan since 1977, when the Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl album first came out. That was my first Beatles album, and
Mm.
I was about seven. Okay, I did not know about um that Everly Brothers song that you're referring to,
Uh-huh.
On the Wings of a Nightingale.
Right.
I did not know about it until, I would say, within the last 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
It just was off my radar. And I happened to be on a Beatles website, or probably a chat board, where somebody mentioned it, and I was like, "Oh, wow! I think I vaguely remember this, but I don't. I've never heard the song." Then, on top of that, they said Paul's demo is absolutely brilliant. It's one of the one or two best songs he wrote after the Beatles, and probably the best song he wrote in the 80s. And I'm like, oh my God, where do I find this demo? Well, after about, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes looking on the internet, I found the demo. I fell in love with it. I
Hmm.
fell, I, but here's the key thing. As much of a Beatles, I don't know if I call myself maybe like a scholar in waiting, or scholar in training.
Uh-huh.
Um, that was something new that I learned only within the last few years. And so th- if I'm just learning about it, I have to imagine there's a lot of people out there that don't know about it at all to this, today.
Right.
So and as it turned out, it's a song that I absolutely fell in love with. I love I love Paul's demo version the most, but I like the Everly Brothers version a lot too. And
Sure.
I play it with the band that I'm in now. I introduced it to them, and we've been playing it, and they love it, and I sing lead on it. I love it, and like I said, it's a fairly new addition to my Beatles knowledge, and so I wanted it in the book.
So when is your Beatle band playing in Connecticut?
We're not a Beatle band.
Oh, okay.
We're actually not a Beatle band. We're more of a garage band.
Oh, okay.
We've never played in front of an audience. We just play for ourselves.
Okay.
Um, but thanks for the invite. No, we play a lot of stuff. Um, we play Beatles, we play McCartney, we play the Monkees. I do a
Mm.
Monkey song with them. We do that. We just started doing the Cowsills. Um,
Cool.
we do the Cars and the Church and uh, Amy Mann's band. Oh my God, I'm blanking. You know
It'll
who I'm
come to
talking.
us. Yes,
Yeah,
I know what you mean.
Till
Yeah.
Tuesday. We do till Tuesday. So yeah, it runs the gamut.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, but we're not a Beatles band, but we do some Beatles stuff.
It's great variety there. What Cowsill
Yeah.
material? I'm just kidding.
Sorry.
What Cowsill songs?
We actually do a fairly recent one. They put out an album in 2000 called Global.
Right.
I don't know if you've ever heard it, but there's
I've
a
heard their recent stuff, and they just put out a brand new album, which I haven't gotten to yet.
okay. Well,
Yeah.
Global has a great song called Under the Gun.
Hmm.
And our one of our lead singers in the band, we've got like three or four. No, we all sing leads on at some point or another. But one of our
Uh-huh.
main leads introduced the song to us, and she loved it, and we started playing it recently. It's called Under the Gun, and it's really, really great. And she introduced another song to us that the Cowsills did, not as the Cowsills, they did it as a pseudonym called Bridie Murphy with Waddy
Okay.
Wachtel in 1974, called "The Time Has Come." And it's like this upbeat kind of kind of sunshine pop song, very easy to play.
Right.
And yeah, we're feeling our way with it. So yeah, all the obscure stuff. We don't do hair. We don't do
Okay.
you know, I
Indian
love
Lake.
this.
Yeah.
We don't do Indian Lake. No.
Oh.
We this way we don't suffer by comparison, you know.
See, you could have worked the Cowsills into your book because they put out a live album where they covered Paperback Writer, I think, and Act Naturally.
Really?
Yeah.
See, I did not
Uh,
know that.
Yep. In
Okay.
their
Well,
early years, they did that.
oh, in the early years.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Okay.
Anyway, so why don't we just discuss a few of the questions that you brought up here? Um,
Sure.
the early years, where did John and Paul meet? You don't have to answer them. I just want to give people,
Right.
an idea of
An
what you're going to
idea.
find in this.
Sure. Sure.
Why Decca Records rejected the Beatles. What songs did they record for the first session for the Please Please Me album? I'm glad that you pointed out because it's a sore spot with me that they did 10 songs out of the 14. Because it
Mm-hmm.
always bothers me every time somebody says they recorded their
The whole
their first album in one day, which they
right.
didn't.
Right.
Most of it,
Right.
but not all of it.
Exactly. Well, see, that's the thing what I tried to do with the McCartney book that you showed earlier, when I tried previously to do with the John Lennon book that I did before that, was dispel a lot of myths,
Hmm.
and just get the real history as we know it at this moment. So yes, that has always been a myth that they recorded the whole album in 24 hours, and no, four of the songs had already been put out as singles.
Hmm.
So.
Yep. So, but it's still a great accomplishment. 10 songs in one.
Mhm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I dare anybody to do that.
Nobody ever talks about the fact that they recorded, I think it was 7 songs in one day that ended up on Beatles for Sale,
Hmm.
plus I Feel Fine, all on the same day. But that was half an album. I guess that's not as exciting as saying the entire album,
Right.
but still, Please Please Me, it was 10 of 14.
Yeah.
What were the Beatles? What were the Beatles' first professional recordings? Tony Sheridan, of course. Um, the Beatlemania chapter, true or false? Something to discuss with you here.
Sure.
Beatles refused to go to America until they had a #1 record. And I remember when I heard Paul McCartney talk about this back in the 80s when I was first doing my show. And I said, how
Yep.
could you possibly say that? Because the arrangement for the Beatles to be on the Ed Sullivan Show was already in the books there in November of
November
1960,
63.
and that was before I Want to Hold Your Hand was released.
Sure.
So sometimes just to give a Beatle the benefit of the doubt, because nobody ever challenged him on this, I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering if maybe he meant the Beatles toured America. They wouldn't tour America until they had a #1 record. It's just that when he talked about it in the interview with Paul Gambaccini, it was also in the context of coming to America and being on the Ed Sullivan Show. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what Paul meant, but hopefully someday one of us will challenge him on that.
He's hard to
Uh,
get in touch with, I can tell you that much. I tried.
who played drums on Love Me Do? Well, there's different versions of Love Me Do. So,
Right.
yeah, but the American hit was um, Andy White. The British one
Yep.
was Ringo, the single.
Mm-hmm.
What was the original title for the Beatles film Help? That's another one where most of us know that instantly, but you just can't expect everyone to know that. Um,
Well, I mean, I have a 20-year-old daughter,
yeah,
and she's a Beatles fan. She doesn't know any of this stuff,
right.
and she will come away from reading this knowing that kind of thing. She hasn't even seen Help yet. I mean, that's how, spotty her knowledge is. She's seen A Hard Day's Night. I forced her to watch it with me, and she enjoyed it, but she hasn't seen Help yet.
Right.
And so this is, this is going to be new information for her demographic, for her and her demographic.
Is she into the history of the Beatles? Does she try to read any books on them or?
To a certain extent, and she has asked me questions about them over the years, and one of, she's has her favorite Beatles songs. When we watched Beatles, excuse me, McCartney 321, the
Mm,
documentary with
Rick Rubin.
Rick Rubin. I'm becoming so terrible with names. I
We're
gotta
both
tell
just
you,
getting that way. It's
yeah,
old age.
with Rick Rubin. I almost said Rob Zombie for some reason. They kind of dress the same. Anyway, but it started with the a cappella vocal tracks of Here, There, and Everywhere, and
Mm,
both of us got very kind of emotional because we love that song. Both of us
right.
love that song. So that's the kind of thing, And so yeah, we watched that together. We watched the entire Get Back 9 hours
Mm,
together. Before Get Back, in preparation for it, I had every night we watched the Beatles anthology because I have it on DVD. So we
wow.
watched that as a primer so that she can get the full context. So yeah, she has a good working knowledge of the history, but hopefully this book and others like it will give her a little bit more deeper knowledge.
Right. Yeah. So she has the patience to sit through all of Get Back and, because
She did. My
good for
wife
her.
didn't. My wife didn't, but my daughter did. my wife's the key line that my wife said was, how many versions of Don't Let Me Down do I have to listen to?
They did a lot of takes of that song. All right. When was the first time the Beatles appeared on US television? Some people may not know the answer to that.
Exactly.
You'll have to get
Exactly.
the bookazine if you want to find out.
Hmm.
Um, oh yeah, you said so. I wasn't aware about this. I know that they were on the Jack Parr show prior to the Ed Sullivan show, but Jack
Hmm.
Parr actually said it's nice to know that England has finally risen to our cultural level. He said that on television.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay. The studio years, name the only song on Sergeant Pepper that George Martin did not arrange. Very good question.
Thank you.
What fantasy novel did the Beatles want to adapt into a movie? For people that don't know that, they'll find that really fascinating. What George Harrison song was cut from the White Album? Who demanded to be paid to be included on the cover of Sergeant Pepper? Um, yeah, a lot of good stuff. On the breaking up chapter, who assembled Let It Be before Phil Spector was brought in? True or false, the Beatles recorded Abbey Road knowing it would be their last album. False. Although, Ringo has changed his tune on that
Hmm.
because I've heard him say more so in the past. We never knew that this was going to be the last album or the last song. And then in recent years, he said, well, we kind of knew it was going to be the last album. So I don't believe it based upon what you had said in here about the meeting that they had in September of
Hmm.
69, where John's proposing the next album to be made
Right.
after Abbey Road.
Right.
Um, the chapter on John, who bought John his first guitar? Where did John and Yoko first meet? The chapter on Paul, what song did he write for the Everly Brothers? What was the
Hmm.
first solo project Paul worked on while in the Beatles? And what was the first song Paul wrote? A lot of this stuff for many of us is like we'd know it on a dime. But at
Hmm.
the same time, a lot of people that haven't studied the history, some of this stuff is really important. Although trivia is supposed to be trivial. So that kind of puts it down as though it's not really as important, but
Hmm.
we think it's important, so it is.
Right.
With George, what benefit concert did George organize? What US president welcomed George to the White House? What was George's first solo album? Ringo, the first Beatles song to have Ringo on lead vocals. What was that? What song did Ringo address his relationship with the other Beatles in after the breakup? Um, and good question here. What band got to have Ringo drum for them for a live performance of Back in the USSR? I remember when that happened and all the
That
attention that it got.
that's one of my favorite questions that I got in there. I was
Yeah,
really excited to get that in there because
right.
I think it's very interesting.
That also happened for the bicentennial.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wait,
Wasn't it?
no, no, it was 1984.
Okay. All right. All right. See, I'm forgetting a little.
Well, see,
That's
that's
why
the
I need
thing.
this bookazine.
You need the bookazine, and we need to cultivate a new generation of Beatles fans because we're not going to be
Right.
around forever. I mean, I'm
And
second generation.
yeah, solo career is what was John's first number one single in the US? That would surprise anyone that doesn't know it. In the late 70s, which Beatle was optimistic enough about the band reuniting that he had a clause in his contract, in his recording contract at the time, the new one that he signed. Um, and thank you for wording this very carefully. What Paul McCartney song supposedly helped inspire John Lennon to come out of retirement? You know, because I think sometimes it's overblown,
Right.
the story there. I know that
Hmm.
John said that he liked the song, but
Hmm.
I think he was gonna record no matter what, whether
Hmm.
Paul had this song out there or not. So, but he admired him for the song. He thought it
Yep.
was a nice piece of work. I
Yep.
think that's what he said in Playboy. But
Well, there's footage of him talking about it in
mhm,
the studio. Have you ever seen it? It's really, really bad quality, but it's
uh-huh,
clearly him, and you can hear his voice is very distinct talking about it. He not only did he like the song, he actually was particular about which version of the song he liked.
yeah,
He was paying attention, even though he denied it. I don't
mm.
know what Paul's doing. I don't know what Dylan's doing. I don't know. But he was paying attention. He knew what Paul was doing. Yeah.
I
So
sometimes wonder, it's hard for me to imagine them not paying attention, all four of them, to what they were doing in their
of
solo careers, album to album.
of
But there's
course.
most of the time there are very few comments about their solo music. Just here and there, a song here and there that they commented about,
Hmm.
you know? Ringo saying he wasn't impressed with Ram, or George saying that he liked that would be something. He liked on
Right.
carrying, I think.
Hmm.
But really, not all that much did they say about each other's solo music.
Particularly as the years went by, for sure. I mean, you get all of the comments or the most of the comments in the wake of the Beatles breakup and the solo careers just starting to take shape. They're a little more vocal about each other's work.
Hmm. Well, you know. it's a fascinating thing. I really wish that Paul and Ringo would talk more about the solo works of the Beatles. I always
Hmm.
enjoyed when was asked, I think he was asked what John Lennon song would he like to cover, and I think he said "Beautiful Boy"
Beautiful boy.
because he really thought it was a beautiful song,
Yep.
obviously. But
Yep.
I'd like to hear more of that.
Hmm.
I wish that they would go album to album and just say, "Well, I like the Mind Games album for this song and that's
Hmm.
whatever." But
Yep.
they really didn't go to those details.
Right. Right. And I do remember the interview where he talked about that was a great interview. And that's the thing when you've lived long enough and you are exposed to this kind of stuff that I was exposed to as growing up. And so I remember all this stuff. So in doing this book, in doing the McCartney book, and doing the John Lennon book, I've got all this stuff trapped in my head from when I was a teenager and reading Rolling Stone religiously and Musician Magazine and Crawdaddy or whatever.
Yeah,
And so I was like, okay, where did I put that magazine? And I would go through my archives, looking for that one particular line that I remembered, but I had to be able to cite it because this is a piece of journalism. You have to be able to cite all of your sources.
right.
So, so yeah, I mean, I remember the context of Paul saying that he was thinking of touring again, and they asked him, do you think you'd ever do one of John's songs in concert?
Hmm.
And he said he was thinking about it. But he said he couldn't bring himself to do Imagine because at that point he goes, Diana Ross is doing Imagine at this point. He goes, I just don't have. He goes, what can I bring to that song at this point? I
Hmm.
might do something a little more obscure. And he mentioned Beautiful Boy, and which I was like, wow. And this was before the 1989 tour, because the 1989 tour was the first time that he did John Lennon songs, exclusively John Lennon songs, but it was a medley. It was Strawberry
Oh,
Fields Forever,
help.
Help, and Give Peace a Chance. So
Right,
he ended up never doing Beautiful Boy anyway,
right.
but it was something that he talked about. But I remember the interview, so it was it's great to have that memory justified. You
Yeah,
know,
I also remember when George made his big comeback with Cloud Nine that Paul
yep,
started saying to the press,
yep,
yeah, maybe I'll try and write with George now or something.
hmm, yep,
And then
absolutely.
George came back and he said, "It's funny, he's known me after all these years and now suddenly he wants to write with me."
Yeah. Well, George was very mercurial because before that, George did, make a comment that said it would be interesting to sit down with Paul and, plunk the guitars together and see what would come of it. And then
Hmm.
when Paul said it, George slapped them down. So it was quite a relationship that those two had. Um, but yeah, but but it was fun. It was fun revisiting all this stuff for this bookazine and the ones before it and the one after it. So,
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever fully understand how complicated the relationships were with the four of them.
oh
You
no.
know, it's just there's so much we'll never know. And I'm fine with that, It's whatever they want to share with us is okay, but
Hmm.
very complicated. Were there
They've
any were
given
there
us a
any
lot.
yeah, sorry.
I was
With,
going to say they've given us a lot as it is. So it's anything else is the cherry on top.
yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Now, were there any questions that you wanted to ask that maybe the publisher here said, no, that may be a little bit too weird a question or
There
too
were
far?
yeah, I mean, nothing as dramatic as that. The way we worked it out was because I knew I had 9 questions per chapter. I didn't want to just submit 9 for approval, and then if, like, say 6 of them get rejected, then I
Uh-huh.
have to come back and come up with another 6. So what I
Right.
did was for each chapter, I always submitted more questions than were needed. So if it was 9 questions, I would submit 12 or 13. And so I mean, I there were a couple that I got pretty obscure on, and I wish that I could. I mean, there was definitely one about Paul being dead, and I
Hmm.
don't think that one made it into. It's been a while since I've read the book. I don't think we got into that. You've read it more recently. Is there a question in there about Paul being
There
dead?
is something in there about Paul being dead.
Oh, so maybe that's the one. Maybe that was. Maybe I was surprised that that one got in and another question didn't. So, um,
See if I can
it's
find it here. But yeah.
with me. It's like once I'm done with the book, I don't think about it. Again for until I absolutely have to. Oh, here it is. True or false? Paul died in 1966 and double replaced him. Okay,
Okay.
then I was surprised that that got in and another question didn't. And the problem is I'm having trouble remembering what the question was that got rejected. Some of the questions that got rejected were just, I mean, they were, there was nothing really that off the wall, or that controversial that we couldn't put it in. I think it was just a matter of, look, I came up with 13 questions that I think any of them could work, and my editor just picked the ones that he felt were the strongest. There wasn't a lot of back and forth. It's not like I disagreed with any of his choices.
Hmm.
I could have gone with any of them if they were 13 questions per chapter. I would have been happy with all 13. So it was pretty much that simple and
Okay.
straightforward.
Very
But
smart to give him extra ones.
yeah, yeah. I wish I could remember when the Paul's death. I do remember that when the Paul's death question was approved, and another one which I thought was even more intriguing wasn't. I was like, wow, okay, I'm just gonna roll with it. But there was a question that I thought of uh afterwards, just recently. It popped into my head. I was like, oh, that would have been a great question. Was in the wake of David Crosby dying, true or false, or what supergroup auditioned for Apple and was rejected?
Uh-huh.
And the answer is Crosby, Stills, and Nash.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? That part of the history.
Yeah,
And
and it worked out for the best. I would say. I mean, James Taylor had some trouble extricating himself from that contract, so it would have been a shame if CSN had the same problem. And yeah,
it's really surprising the artists who did very well after leaving Apple, and not just
yeah,
James Taylor. You had Billy Preston doing okay.
hmm
You had even Hot Chocolate as a band had a few hits. But yeah, so this is definitely something that I would recommend everybody getting. The trivia book of the Beatles. Incidentally, it's a good opportunity for me to say that since trivia has been a big part of my career and all the shows that I've done and my website, one of the next shows that you're going to find on this channel is going to be an all trivia show where I'm inviting everyone from the Talk More Talk podcast to be contestants. And it's going to be a combination of trivia questions and lots of the Beatle games that I've done through the years. If you're not familiar with that, you can always go to my website, kenmichaelsradio.com, to the Beatles trivia and games page. And every single week, there's a contest where you can win one of 10 prizes on the website. But this will be for fun, and hopefully I'll be able to do it somewhat frequently on the channel. So be on the lookout for that. Trivia should be on everyone's mind because of this bookazine. And of course all the stuff that I do with Beatles trivia. So Glenn, thank you so much for spending time with us. And yeah, we're going to put the link up so people can order this in the description box and come back whenever you want.
Oh, I would love to. Thank you so much for having me and for giving me a chance to talk to you and your viewers again.
Okay. Thanks so much. Thanks to all of you for watching. We'll see you next time.